But yeah, that sounds not too loud. That's is that fine? Okay. Okay, good. Welcome everybody to our presentation about the Percussa Super Signal Processor eurorack module. I'm Bert, and this is Celine, and together we are Percussa. So I'll start with a couple of patches on the SSP to show you what you can do with it, and then I'll explain how the module works, the different menus, how to use the I/O, and all those kind of things. So this first patch is what typically comes up when the SSP starts. There are about 60 patches that we ship with the SSP, covering all kinds of different things, from polyphonic wavetable synthesis to multi-timbral stuff to sequencing, sampling, granular stuff. The SSP supports class-compliant MIDI controllers, so I have a key step here, which I can play. So this patch is eight voices. So inside the patch, you can see there is a wavetable oscillator, input module, a MIDI module, an envelope, and a bus module. And so you have 8 voices. So if you keep going right on the patching screen, you'll see there is all the voices. So the numbers here correspond to, those are the page numbers basically. And then at the beginning, here in the first page, you have an effects section. So the sound goes through a delay and a reverb, and then to the output basically. And so the SSP has 8 outputs and 16 inputs. They're all DC coupled. They're all sampled at 32 bits resolution, and they support 48 kilohertz, 96 kilohertz, and 192 kilohertz sample rates. So I have the planner hooked up here, and I can use this joystick to shape the sound of the waves. In the patch, I have also routed here on the last screen via a bus module. I have routed the mod wheel of the key step to all the wavetable oscillators as well. So if I play that, or I can bend all the voices simultaneously using the pitch bend slider, because I routed the pitch bend information to all the voices as well. And so the pitch bend information is turned by the MIDI module into a kind of a virtual CV signal, which can then be scaled using the patch list here, the connection list here on the right-hand side. So you can determine how wide the pitch bend is, for example, and all that stuff. So obviously you can also use, besides the joystick, you can use, let's say, mats to modulate it. That's also possible. So I make these 2 mats channels cycle. Now if you go look here, so if you play it, so you can really do all kinds of stuff with it. You have 16 inputs, so a lot of modulation possibilities. So the wavetable oscillator is capable of loading any wave file, so you don't have to especially prepare a wavetable. You could just as well write a drum loop, and it will cut it up into pieces, and it will make it into a 3D space. And so with X, Y, and Z, you can navigate the space of the waves, and the waves are morphed as you navigate the space, basically. So that's what we've been doing. So if you just the x-axis, the y-axis, then there's the z-axis. So yeah, so that's one patch. You can also stack the wavetable oscillator up to 4 times. There's a different patch for that's nice to play with, which is monophonic, but you can just as well make this polyphonic if you wanted to. So this patch has the wavetable oscillator, and then it has a state variable filter, it has an envelope for the filter, and it has a reverb. So if you play it, so the filter is controlling the X of the wavetable oscillator, but it's also, the envelope is controlling the X of the wavetable oscillator, but it's also controlling the filter, basically. So it's a pretty simple patch. So the MIDI module gives you a pitch signal based on the note of the controller, which you can also send externally from the SSP, so you can send it to some other oscillators if you wanted to. There is velocity on and velocity off output. There's a gate output. You have aftertouch output. And then you have 8 controller outputs. So if you have a fader box or a knob box, you can set the controllers here on the P page of the MIDI module. And then those will be turned into kind of CVs, which you can then route internally or externally to control stuff. And then there's a pitch bend output as well for that module. So if you have an MPE controller, that works out of the box as well. So as you play notes, controllers or aftertouch information or whatever, it will come out of the MIDI module as you play notes. So that makes it easy to build multiple voices and then associate all the typical MPE controllers with that note. So there is nothing special you have to do to really use MPE controllers with this. There's some other interesting patches. For example, there is, so this is again a polyphonic patch where you have 3 oscillators per voice, and then you have 2 envelopes, one for the filter and one for the oscillators. And so altogether 12 oscillators in this patch and 4 filters. So it's kind of like an subtractive synthesis, like Oberheim kind of patch. So on the last screen, there's an effects section with delay and reverb, which takes the final signal from the bus and processes it. And then you have all the oscillators which go through the bus, basically. Let's go to another example where you have, let's say, a multi-timbral patch, which combines FM and sampling. So you have 2 operators for a bell sound, and then you have kind of like a voice sound. I'm spoiled the secret. I should just have played it. But it sounds like this. So the sampler can load 8 different samples, and then every sample can have up to 8 channels, and the colors represent the channels. And then you can either choose whether the sampler sums the channels altogether and outputs it through the 8 outputs, or you can use the first channel of every sample. Like in the case of drums, for example, you're just interested in the first sample. You can do that as well. So, and in the sampler, you can choose the start position for playback and the length of playback, and you can adjust the crossfading as well on the sample. You can see the 2 playheads kind of like moving along when they're crossfading. You also have a zoom function to zoom in, zoom out. Then variation of that is kind of the same patch with using the Granular. And so instead of using sample modules, we use the Granular, and we have, again, 1, 2, 3, 4, oh, actually 3 voices, and every voice has this FM pair plus a Granular module, which is using a sample. I'll explain the Granular in another patch in a minute, because it's like a whole explanation in itself. There's also sequencing in the SSP. So this is an additive synthesis patch where you have 3 times 4 oscillators to create kind of like an organ sound. And then you have a sequencer at the very end of the patch matrix, where you have a step sequencer. It's controlling all the oscillators. And so the step sequencer has a step output, which continuously outputs the step. And then you have gate tracks for outputting gates. And then you have last outputs, which basically output the step value the last time the gate was high. So if you go in here and you can adjust steps like that, it's bipolar. And then you can turn gates on and off. Then you have tempo as well. You can divide the clock down. You can limit the length of the sequence. It goes up to 64 steps. You can adjust the step length. You have the possibility to adjust the number of levels you have to quantize it. You have up to 64 patterns. You can choose, different pattern if you want. You can copy paste patterns. You can also MIDI sync a pattern. So you can take the MIDI clock from somewhere, and then it will sync to the MIDI clock. You can do that. You can internally sync multiple step sequencers. So if you have like 8 sequencers, you can internally sync them using the internal sync button. So that's, other possibilities. Then let's go to the microtonal quantizer. So there is a quantizer in the SSP which supports microtonal scales. And so this patch has 4 microtonal quantizers, and then it has 4 sequencers and 4 LFOs. And so the microtonal quantizer can load any scale from the Scala archive. There's about 4,500 scales, which are free. You can make your own as well. A scale file is just a text file with ratios in it. And so when you load the scale file, then together with the root node, the module creates like a frequency map. So if you adjust the root node, the map changes. And it uses the map to quantize the pitches. So when you send a CV, either externally or internally into the quantizer, it turns into a frequency, quantizes it, converts it back to like a virtual CV, which you could send out or use internally or whatever. And of course, you can, use whatever to modulate the sequences or the pitches. So that's fun to play with, offers a lot of possibilities. If I want a different scale, just go in here. This is just one folder. There's like, 4,500 scales. Like it's like insane. Load some other scale. I'm not a composer, so I don't know anything about microtonal composition. So don't be mad. Let's see what else we have. So we have another patch where I use the step sequencer to choose a sample from 8 percussion samples using a switcher module. So the step values determine how the gate is routed to the sampler. And the sampler has 8 samples loaded into it, 8 different gate inputs. So depending on the height of the step, it routes the gate differently, and that's how you get this sequence. So if I change this, there you go. So just one example of how to use a sequencer with the sampler. Let's go to so this patch is a demonstration of the envelope follower module, which is also in the SSP. So you can play back a drum loop and then feed it through the envelope follower. Then you get an envelope signal, and you can feed that to a filter, for example. And then if you pass a sawtooth through the filter, this is the result. So if you want to play with the drum loop, gonna crossfade it. There you go. You can tune it up or down. So when I turn it up, I'm basically changing the frequency that the synthesizer uses as the base frequency for the sample, which is why the pitch goes down. Let's see what else we have here. There is the Granular module, which is fun to play with as well. So I'll use the mats to to modulate the start position of the granular. Let's see. I patched it the wrong way. Sorry. It has to go like this. So inside the input module, you have scopes. And so you can go through all the rows of the inputs. And every row, you get 4 scopes. So you can see what's going on when you plug in a signal. I mean, when you connect something. Let's see how this. There you go. So in the granular, you have a start position, which is the position of the selection window. And then you have a length parameter, which changes the length of the window. And the grains are picked from the window. So if the window is wider, then you have more choice for the granular to pick the grains. If the window is very short like this, then it can really only pick from that particular position. As you can see. And so you can change the grain duration. It becomes more kind of a choppy sound if the grains are shorter. If I make it longer, it's more blended together. Then I can tune it up or down, of course. If you want to load a different file, you just go here in the list. Find like this choir sound, for example. You can also change the grain trigger frequency, which is the rate at which the grains are triggered. You can set a maximum for the number of grains. And then you have the possibility to record live into it. We'll go to a different patch to show you that. And then there is a randomization parameter for the length of the grains, and also a randomization for the panning of the grains. And then finally you have a texture control which shapes the grain. And so there is 10 different windows, and as you turn texture control, the sound changes. And so let's say you wanted to modulate the texture control. You could go into the grid of the SSP and patch this LFO to the granular. So patching is done using the shift left or the shift right key, depending on where you want to patch. So if the module is on the left hand side, use the left key. If the module is on the right hand side, use the right key. And then you just press the button that corresponds to where the module is, and then you patch the two modules together. Then on the right hand side, you can choose the combination of output and input that you want to use. For example, if you want to use the sine wave output of the LFO with the start input of the granular, then you enable this row basically. So let's say we want to use a sawtooth output, like inverted sawtooth, to control the granular texture. You'd like enable it like this. Then you go one time to the granular and you enable the texture input. We'll have to do this once. It's already enabled, in fact. And now when you go to the granular module again, you will see the shape of the grain being modulated in real time, while the start position is also being modulated. So let's find the one where I was using the live input of the granular. This is a patch I worked on earlier today, where I use this clock to trigger an envelope So this clock triggers this envelope, which controls amplitude, modulates the filter, as well as controls the cutoff of the filter. And there is a wavetable oscillator here, which is being modulated by this LFO here on the right-hand side, which is why it's like going all over the place. And so the sound of the wavetable oscillator goes through the filter, actually 2 filters, and then it goes into the granular, because the granular is a stereo module. It has 2 inputs, so it can process 2 signals at the same time. And so the melody or the pitches come from the step sequencer here on the right-hand side. So the step values come out of the step sequencer and then into the pitch input of the wavetable oscillator here. So you can see the pitch is changing while the gate from this clock is going. So now we can go into the granular and we can start recording. And so when you record, it keeps recording over itself. There is an overdubbing factor. So there's an overdubbing factor here, which controls how much new and old signal you are recording on top of itself. So you can see the recording continuously going on and looping around. And then with the blend parameter, you can choose the dry-wet mix between the granular and the live input. So now if you decide you want to stop recording, you just want to use what you have, you just stop recording, and now you can use what you have, and then if you want to record again, you just hit record again, and it continues recording over itself. And of course, you can modulate all these things because the granular module has all these modulation inputs, has a frequency modulation input, has an amplitude modulation input, start and length inputs for the window. The recording gate, if you want to use a gate to stop and start the recording. There is inputs for the trigger frequency, for the number of grains, for the dubbing factor, for the blending factor. So yeah, you really have a lot of possibilities for modulation here. You mean the sound or the patch?
Like whatever the patch is.
Yeah.
You can just export it to whatever.
Yeah, so you cannot, like in the granular, you cannot. There is no save button to save the recording that you recorded into the granular. But on the SSP, there is a multi-channel recorder on the 4th page, the R page, and there you can record all the inputs and or all the outputs to flash. And then you have a WAV file, a multi-channel file, and you can load that into the granular. So that's one way to do it. So, you know, while we're at this, let's say I want to record this joystick, I can do that because all the inputs and the outputs are DC coupled. So I can record CVs, triggers, gates, audio, it doesn't matter, with 32-bit resolution. And so you can arm the channels that you want. So let's say I just want channels 1 and 2. I'll just not arm the other ones because I was like previously recording like 16 channels. So I don't need to do that right now. Let's just do these 2. Then I do record input. And then when I move the joystick, you see I can record the joystick. But, you know, could just as well be recording this STO or whatever. Doesn't matter. Then you can stop recording, and now you have a 2-channel file, and you can start editing it if you want. There's a start and length control for this selection window. You can zoom in and out of the file. And then you can also reverse the file if you want, or you can normalize it, you can crop it. And it's non-destructive, so when you save, then the changes are applied, but not until you press save. And it can deal with very big files. It can deal with files up to 2 gigabytes, and it's able to normalize files up to 2 gigabytes. It can reverse files up to 2 gigabytes, can crop files up to 2 gigabytes, and so on. So then, per channel, you also have the possibility to monitor the signal. So if you have this STO here coming in and you want to monitor that signal, you would go in here and press this button. I mean, so those 8 buttons correspond to the 8 outputs. So if I want to send that input to the first jack here, I just press that button. Then now I can monitor. Or if I want to play back, I can set per channel. I can choose to which of these outputs I want to play back. That's possible as well.
You could route those internally to other patches or to other modules within your patch.
Yeah, so that the recorder works independently of the patching screen where your synthesis patch is running. So that also means that if you want to record what your patch is doing, that's also possible. You just go to the output recorder, and there you have the sound from your patch. So if you arm that and you press record, now you have, that's the input recorder. So you have to press the button to record the output, not the button to record the input. Okay, so now you have a piece of sound from your patch. Now, if you want to play that back, you'd go here and like listen it to that first output, for example, and then now you're hearing the patch, now you're hearing the file. So you have the possibility to record inputs or outputs, the WAV files. The output files can be up to 8 channels. The input files can be up to 16 channels. And when you load them in Logic or Ableton Live or whatever, you have a file with all these channels, and you can use it instantly. So you could use your joystick movements for something else, for example, if you wanted to. Let's see what else we haven't done yet. What is that? Yeah, so let's take a look at the patching. I mean, the physical modeling patch. Hold on, 129. Hold on. So this is a patch. It's a very simple patch where you have the physical modeling membrane module that I'm triggering with this external clock, and then I have 2 noise generators which are slowly changing the tension and the power parameter of the physical modeling. So there you go. So you have that as well. So let's look at the the module catalog. When you are on top of a cell and you press the encoder, you can see the catalog of all the modules. So you have an output module, an input module to use the jacks, and you have a bus module for making buses. You have a delay and a reverb module. You have an LFO, which is also a normal oscillator, by the way, because we're using it in the subtractive patch that I played earlier. So it can do audio rate stuff. There's a wavetable oscillator, a macro module, so if you want to create a patch where you turn one knob and you control multiple things, that is what you would use, the macro module. The sampler module, we've played with that a little bit. And there is the Granular module, which has the live input, but can also load samples. It works in stereo. There's a noise generator, which you can use kind of as a slow-moving random source, but also as a noise source, really. I mean, if you insert this, let's say I make a patch from scratch. I just erase the entire patch. I insert the noise generator. Then I insert an output module. And I patch the noise generator to the output module. Now I say I want to use the output of the noise generator with the first input of the output module. Do that. Then here, enable that. And now it's going to the output. So if I then wanted to use that to control, let's say, a sine wave, patch that to the output module, the oscillator, and then I, instead of patching the noise generator to the output, I patch it to this sine oscillator, let's say to the pitch input, enable the pitch input. And here I take the sine output, enable the sine output in combination. There you go. So you can go very precise with adjustments, as you can see. A couple of minutes of time on the LFOs, of cycle time. Yeah, so there's a lot more stuff. I cannot possibly go through everything, but let's look at the patch matrix again, because that was, the module list. Step sequencer, we talked about that. Microtonal quantizer. There's envelope generator, comp filter, state variable filter, envelope follower, simple delay line, the switcher module, a VST host. So you cannot host PC or Mac plugins, that would be impossible, but you can host Linux plugins. So the platform runs a highly streamlined version of Linux that we did a lot of work on, and you can load Linux plugins as long as they're compiled for ARM. So we provide free source code for people who want to make their own plugins. It's in our forum. We have an active forum where we post updates every couple of weeks, and where there's like patch collections and samples and stuff, and like people are talking about the module all the time. And so we have a code example for those who want to make their own modules, basically. And so we chose the VST standard because people are already familiar with that. They might already have made a VST plugin or so, and that makes it easy for those people to transition onto the SSP. There's a bit crusher module, a wave shaper, a DC generator, which is just outputting steady signal. The MIDI module, already talked about that a little bit. There's also an arpeggiator, which you can use to normal arpeggios, but you can also use it to make kind of like oscillators, because all the arpeggiator does is it takes a clock input, and every clock it adds or subtracts a value to a signal, and it can go audio rate. So it can do more than just normal arpeggios, basically. Other than that, so at the global, there's 4 pages: a global page, a network page where you patch things together. Then there is the P page where you dive into a module after you've selected it, like this. And then there is the R page where you record stuff, sample stuff. Then other than that, what else can I say about the SSP? There is 2 ports for MIDI controllers, and also 1 port supports an USB Ethernet dongle. So if you want to put it on your network and you're a developer and you want to connect to it to copy files or stuff, you can do that. So the middle MIDI port is typically for MIDI controllers, and then there is a USB device port which can stream audio to your computer. So when you connect it to your Mac, for example, or PC, you can send the output audio directly to your computer into your DAW if you want. Yeah, I think that's kind of it. Do you have any questions? Is there anything you wanted to see?
Can you play from the keyboard and record into the sequencer and then have it record like your steps?
No, there is no MIDI recorder. There is, you can, of course, record whatever you're playing as a WAV file using the recorder, the multi-channel recorder, but there is no like MIDI recorder. Yeah. Yet. But at the rate with the updates. Yeah, the question was whether you can record the MIDI notes you're playing to disk as a MIDI file, for example, or internally in the sequence or so. That's something you cannot do yet. If we add a MIDI recorder module later on, that might become possible, but not right now. But you can, if you play, of course, the output of your patch can be recorded to disk as a WAV file using the built-in multi-channel recorder. That's totally possible right now. That's no problem.
It wouldn't necessarily have to be MIDI at that point. Because your MIDI, you're converting it into a CV anyway. So yeah, if we had some way of taking a CV from an oscillator or whatever, and sample and holding that into the step sequencer, that would also accomplish what he's asking for.
Yeah. So like one possible interesting idea is to add an input to the step sequencer for recording steps. Another input to like advance the step or something when you're recording. That would be very interesting to do for sure, yeah. There is already a clock input, so you can clock a step sequencer with an external clock signal. That's possible for sure. And there is an input for modulating the tempo of the sequencer, for example. But yeah, those inputs are very interesting, yeah. It's a good idea. Did I repeat the question or not? No, see, I forgot again. So the question was whether you could take a CV and record that directly into the step sequencer. And that's not possible right now, but that's something we could add, like if we added a recording input into the step sequencer and then maybe an advanced step input to like move the step forward or something. That would make it possible. And you could feed a clock into one input and then your CV into the other input, and that way you could record into the step sequencer. More questions? Or things you want to see that you haven't seen yet that you thought you wanted to see? The comp filter? So what do you want to feed through the comp filter? Okay, well, we could feed a drum loop through it or something. So let's like load this drum loop, make that loop. So I repeat this. So I patch the sampler to the comp filter. First output goes into the comp filter input. Then here I enable the comp filter input. Then I patch comp filter to the output module. I enable output out in 1, for example. There's a feedback control, a delay control, a dampening factor. Is that what you wanted to hear? Absolutely. Okay, good. Other questions, other things you wanted to see, patches you want to see again? $2,000. And they have them here at Perfect Circuit.
similar to how, like the Moog has its own like desktop editor. Any plans for that?
Yeah, we thought about that, about doing an editor. So maybe at some point in the future we'll do that. Yeah. It will probably work over Ethernet. Like you plug in the USB Ethernet dongle, put it on your network, and then like it finds the SSP on the network and you could edit it. That's definitely an interesting idea we've thought about many times. So. Any other questions or wishes, dreams and secrets? Okay. All right, then I guess we'll move on to the raffle part. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.